ton of legitimacy to the Russian state. Then you have Brezhnev. Brezhnev went back and made it more Soviet. So he practiced a couple of different things. One was nuclear parity with the United States. He made sure for every nuke we had, they had one. Um, he also was extremely strict over the economy. There's something called the Brezhnev stagnation, that because Khrushchev had some type of economic reforms, the economy was actually getting a little bit better, even though they were spending 90% of their money on military arms. Not really 90, but close. But Brezhnev ups that, whatever the military spending was, and he causes this thing called the Brezhnev stagnation, which is a slowing of the economy, which basically led Gorbachev down a never-ending road of like the Soviet Union's failing, and it's all going to be blamed on you. He invades the Middle East, specifically Afghanistan. That happens a little bit with Gorbachev as well, and that's where the United States really has that quasi-Cold War. We start funding the Taliban. The Taliban, led by a senator named Charlie Wilson, are starting to receive governmental grants from $1 million all the way up to about $500 million by the end of it, to close to $1 billion. And their sole purpose was fighting the Russian military. So where U.S. backed Taliban forces were fighting the Russian military. So that happened during the 80s, and that's the height, the peak of the Cold War. 63 with the Cuban Missile Crisis is like one peak. The last peak that really drives it home is the Afghanistan intervention. Gorbachev, three-prong attack. You have Glasnost, democratization, and perestroika. Glasnost is openness. For the first time, you can criticize the government. You can criticize people. You can have freedom of speech. Democratization. Let's have freedom of voting. Let's have real voting. And then perestroika. It's a allowance to be critical, and it's an openness for reform. So Glasnost and perestroika are very, very similar, and basically that allowed for some type of fall of the USSR. And then you have the famous Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, Berlin Wall moment, and you have the fall of Berlin Wall in 1988. Revolution of 1991 to 1993, that was started by Yeltsin and a couple of military leaders. It was military leaders that were pro-Soviet versus military leaders in Yeltsin that were pro-democracy. It'll end up being Yeltsin winning this revolution, creating the Constitution in 1993, which creates the Russian judicial branch, creates a higher legislative branch with power, with actual teeth, and it allows him to try to put into economic transformations that when he came to America and saw our supermarkets, saw our just massive amounts of food choices, he realized that he had to put his foot down and really try to grind and bring the Russian state out. He was very close with Bill Clinton. I've talked about that before, showed you the video. Then you have Vladimir Putin, ascendancy. He was KGB agent, and then he ends up becoming a member of parliament, goes up to become prime minister in about 96, takes over as president in 99, and then basically since then he's reorganized the entire control over the Russian state and ensured that he's in power, and there's really nothing you can do about that. The oligarchy that put him in power, most of them have been arrested or exiled out of the country. They're not allowed to ever come back to the country, or we have no idea where they are. The reintegration of Crimea I talked about, the election hacking, to what extent, where, that's up for political debate for the next century. Syria and Assad relationship, this is the one part where Putin backs Bashar al-Assad, the ruler of Syria. He's known for gassing his own people, and then the United States has backed the Kurds and certain Mujahideen fighters against the ISIS. So it's a big, basically everyone's shooting at everybody in Syria. And then the United States withdrew, and the Kurds hated us for it. Judicial branches, rule of law, purpose and powers, term limits, and nominations all are at the will of the Putin government. All right? So I don't want to go too far. I'll make another one on China. Hopefully that recorded everything.